Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, June the 15th, 2023. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district and today are located on the Kamloops to Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Kamloops to Secwepemc and respects the territory and land on which we gather today. Thompson-Nicola Regional Library update. The Thompson-Nicola Regional Library is excited to present the Summer Reading Club 2023 themed Journey Through Time. This province-wide club runs throughout the summer and provides options for readers of all ages, from infants to adults, daycare kids, teens, and more. The TNRD invites residents to join programs offered at all 12 libraries, mobile library stops, and debut programs at Aberdeen Mall in Kamloops. Registration begins on June the 19th. See tnrl.ca for more details. 4 members of the Vavenby Fire Department and a fire engine from the department were deployed a week ago on June 8th to the Tumbler Ridge area to support firefighting efforts and returned home yesterday, June 14th. As we all know, many extra hands and resources are in Northeast BC helping fight many wildfires in the Peace region. And this type of deployment happens in a hurry. A call out is made for support to fire departments like Vavenby to see if they have resources to spare. And typically the department will have to confirm with their plans within a few hours, if not sooner. That means that firefighters are putting their lives at home on hold, saying a quick goodbye to their families, and packing a bag to go fight fires for days or weeks at a time. To the 4 members of the Vavenby Fire Department, Nico, James, Ben, and Isaac, thank you for your efforts and welcome home. And this is a nice segue into a reminder for all residents about Fire Smart and to consider what you can do to make your property resistant to wildfires. There is no better time to think about this than now. There are many Fire Smart initiatives and it can be hard to know where to start, but most Fire Smart measures are surprisingly easy to do, whether it's basic home maintenance, landscaping, or storing combustible items at least 10 meters from structures on your property. Begin at your home and work your way outwards. Residents of the TNRD are encouraged to go online to find tips and helpful resources on Fire Smart, which you can access at tnrd.ca/firesmart. The TNRD wants to publicly recognize that June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada, and that June 21st is National Indigenous Peoples Day. This day is meant for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We will be receiving the 2023-2026 strategic plan today. You will find a copy in your blue folders. In this document, the TNRD board has identified that building a strong and lasting relationship with all First Nations within our region is a key focus of the TNRD. The TNRD is committed to developing meaningful and strong connections with First Nations in our region with a foundation of trust and transparency. For TNRD staff, part of the role of the External Relations and Advocacy Advisor will be to help guide the TNRD in this critical work once that position is in place, which is something that we are all looking forward to. On Zoom today attending, we have Director Sao. Welcome, Director Sao, out there in Zoom land. Is that the only person? And Director Sarai. Welcome, Director Sarai, who can obviously hear us. Upcoming meetings and events, Saturday, June 24th at 11 a.m. Everyone is invited to the grand reopening celebration at Latrimore Park in Littlefort. And on Thursday, July 13th at 1:30 p.m., we have our regular board meeting. Today in your blue folders, you will find regular mail and, as I mentioned, a copy of the strategic plan. This morning's policy committee meeting ran for 8 minutes under the chair of Director Bass. We are already 7 minutes into this meeting, so we will not be finished in 8 minutes, just in case anyone had their hopes up. We move on to item 4, additions to or deletions from the agenda. I will note that item 10.1.10 has been removed. It regarded an unsightly premises in Area A, and I am very glad to report that staff informs me the issue has been resolved. Are there any other additions to or deletions from the agenda? A motion to pass the agenda as amended. Director Getz, seconded by Director Blackwell. All those in favor? Carried. We have the minutes of the regular board meeting held on May the 18th, 2023. We have a recommendation. Director Laird, seconded by Director Ranta. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 6.1, we have a delegation from BGC Engineering. Is Chris Holm? Yes, Chris Holm is with us. So over to you for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and through the Chair to directors. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share with you what is in fact several years worth of work that we'll aim to get through in the next 10 minutes or so. I'm going to share my screen, and perhaps you could let me know by a nod, or Chair, just please confirm that you can see my screen. Perfect. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. All right. BGC, with the coordination support of Fraser Basin Council and with TNRD staff and others across the Thompson River watershed, have completed multi-year flood and steep creek assessments across the entirety of the watershed, including the entirety of the TNRD, as well as the adjoining areas of the Regional District of North Okanagan and the Columbia-Shuswap Regional District. My name is Chris Holm. I'm a principal with BGC Engineering. I've been with BGC for about 19 years and have been involved in these projects since their inception. Joined today by my colleague, Alyssa Scordo, who's also going to speak to parts of this work. The purpose of bringing together this summary today is to speak through an arc of work that initiated way back in 2018 at a community-to-community forum that was hosted by Fraser Basin Council and aimed to convene local governments and First Nations communities across the watershed to think about creating a stronger pathway towards managing the risks that folks face from floods and other hazardous debris events on steep creeks. As that work has spanned now 5 years, it's gone through a number of iterations, as well as some changes to staff, as well as directors at the TNRD. And we thought that it might be helpful to share what has been delivered and respond to any technical questions that you may have. And if there's also other questions around how this material will be used internally by the TNRD, my understanding is that there's folks here, staff, that can help with those questions as well. This work considered a range of hazard processes in the changing climate, and it's intended to strengthen risk management decision-making at a regional scale and across the district. We distinguish in this work between the types of floods that you would normally see on the major water courses, so the Thompson River or others like that, where water overflowing its banks might inundate a community. And then there's the debris floods and the debris flows, which occur on a much steeper tributary creeks, and that laden with debris can pose a higher level of destructive potential. And I'm sure all in this room are very well familiar with those, especially those that have been recently occurring after the large wildfires that have extended over the last number of years across the district. each step of this work, as we move from district-wide level of detail and extent through highly detailed, refines past work. The idea is to always be building on what you've done before to avoid duplication, and over a series of steps, develop maps that cover an entire district, and then recognizing the much higher levels of effort that are needed when one then goes to a higher level of detail, provide an objective way to decide where to focus one's effort, as well as sometimes a way to explain why one is not focusing one's effort in a particular location in favor of another, and then proceed to subsequent steps of desktop level floodplain mapping and more detailed floodplain mapping. And in doing so, get to a level of detail that's suitable and that meets professional practice standards for mitigation planning, design, and regulatory instruments such as floodplain bylaws and official community plans. So just to speak to those in a little bit of detail, and then I'll pass it to Alyssa to talk through the current work. Hazard identification maps. These are the ones that were developed early on. They identify hazard-prone areas across large regions at a screening level of detail. So if your question is, yes or no, am I approximately inside a floodplain? Is my house inside the floodplain, maybe the 200-year floodplain? That's the sort of question that this type of mapping is aiming to address. So we're looking at thousands of approximate floodplain extents over very large areas. It's intended to indicate areas for further study. It's not yet at a sufficient level of detail or precision to bring directly into floodplain bylaws, but it's a very useful tool because it can be efficiently mapped over these very large areas. From there, we move into subsequent work, which we think about base level maps. And so in this case, we're looking at large extents, so maybe from Kamloops up to Clearwater, very long extents of river system that are very costly to develop a very detailed floodplain map around. But you probably would like a better sense of the extents across a range of return periods. You'd like to know the difference between a 20-year flood and a 100-year flood, for example. This type of work is good for that. And some of the deliverables that we have provided refine these estimates of flood extents in these areas, and they serve as a basis to inform assessments of flood hazard and risk as might be required in bylaws, but not yet at a level of detail that one might use, say, to think about flood construction levels. That would be something for a floodplain bylaw. So intermediate step, and serving as a springboard for these really detailed maps. In the case of the detailed maps, these are the most recent iterations of this current work on the floodplains. And we're looking here at the city of Merritt, which, as we all know, is devastated by flooding in November of 2021. And we really would like to acknowledge the heavy impacts that community continues to grapple with as they think about how to manage flood risk in a changing climate. These are the main deliverables of the current work. They involve detailed flood hazard scenarios, as well as flood construction level maps, which can inform both emergency management, emergency preparedness, emergency response, as well as with the regulatory maps, the basis to potentially, if the TNRD so chooses, bring these types of mapping into bylaws. Alyssa, I'll shift over to you if you'd like to share the most recent work.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and hello to everyone. As Chris mentioned, as part of a natural disaster mitigation program funded project, we recently delivered new flood hazard mapping for over 230 kilometers of floodplains and alluvial fans within the Thompson River watershed. For several areas that are listed on the screen here, these maps provide an update to historical floodplain maps that were previously developed by the province. For example, historical floodplain maps developed for the North and South Thompson rivers at the city of Kamloops were previously developed in the 1970s and 1980s. So as a result of this more recent work, these maps include updated topography and considerations for future climate as part of the modeled scenarios. Next slide there. So building on the detailed floodplain mapping that was previously conducted with the city of Merritt, BGC is currently working on federally funded project with Fraser Basin and the province to extend the detailed floodplain maps upstream and downstream of the city. So the Coldwater River and the upper and lower Nicola flow through Merritt, TNRD electoral areas, N and M, and several First Nations communities along the corridor. Many of these communities were impacted by the atmospheric river and extreme flood event that occurred in November 2021 and have unfortunately limited hazard information for emergency or land use planning. So as a result, the floodplain mapping looks to provide common data inputs to hydrology and climate change consideration for application across the Nicola River corridor. And that work is anticipated for the end of this year in terms of delivery of the updated floodplain maps.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. Now, as we've spoken through here, a key message in this work is very much that geohazard risk management is a process that iterates over time. We're always aiming to build on this past work, and where a district government is at a very appropriate and helpful scale to regionally coordinate risk management planning. Sometimes it can be very difficult to do at a small scale for small local governments that are located partway up a watershed where the flood is coming from upstream and is impacting others downstream. But at a regional perspective, these assessments that start at watershed scale are a really effective way to think about how to identify areas of concern, how to prioritize areas of focus, how to assess and evaluate the risks that might be associated with these flood or other types of hazards, and then how to put in place the appropriate decision protocols that will allow staff and governments to achieve their mandates to manage risks associated with these events in a changing climate, and then implement such plans in ways that can reasonably measure their effectiveness against the costs that were incurred in order to put these measures into place. And we are also working in other jurisdictions that are a little further along in this process, where some of that subsequent latter stages have occurred. But this type of work forms a foundation for this to be really regionally developed across the Thompson. So in summary, multi-year projects have been developing over the last number of years and continue today. These are aiming to support local governments. They're part of a provincial-led process, and we're aiming through these to support work that would be at a higher level of detail for local governments, such as the TNRD, to think about and consider when you are developing decision-making processes, planning, policy, and regulation associated with this type of work. So to access the reports and the maps, there's two websites there that are listed, thompsonflood.ca, where you can download the maps and reports, and a website called Cambio, where at province-wide scale and within the TNRD, the maps are visually and easily accessible. All of the geospatial data, the data itself, has also been provided over and is available to the local GIS staff at the TNRD. So we'll stop there and take any questions or comments as you might have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I see Director Getz's hand up. Is there anyone else? Go ahead, Director Getz.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Mike Getz. I'm the Mayor of Merritt. I have a couple questions for you. On May 4th, I was invited to testify before the Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities in Ottawa. This is a group that is now being formed to help communities that have been devastated and try to do mitigation work before it has happened. It's a fairly new group, and I'm just wondering if it has come across your table. And if it has or has not, it might be a good idea to get a hold of this group to start giving them your findings. The other thing that we have had a problem with is dike standards, Q200 levels, Q340, Q500. Nobody seems to know what those dikes should look like. And I would like to know, I'm hoping that that's something that your group will come up with as a diking standard, as well as looking after orphan dikes and all the rest of that kind of stuff. FCM, I was in Toronto at FCM, and FCM is now finally getting on board with the fact that we have climate change because the east is on fire. And now all of a sudden it's a big to-do. So Ottawa, they had to breathe smoke yesterday, so they were pretty upset about that. So something that we've been doing for 5 years. The other thing that there's a problem with, and it may not be yourselves to deal with, is the mitigation funding, DMAF, the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Funding, as well as the DFAA. DFAA rebuilding back to what the current standards are is no longer acceptable. If you flooded out once, especially with 14 atmospheric rivers that have come your way, DFAA is now a pointless endeavor and should be redone as well. And that's where I'm hoping your group could possibly get some weight behind that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Getz. There's lots to unpack there in your comments, and we do appreciate how challenging it has been and continues to be in the city of Merritt, as well as for the First Nations communities up and downstream. There's a couple of things that come to mind. First, thank you for the insight into the work going on in Ottawa. I was not aware of that working group, so that's good to know. Speaking to the corridor there, BGC is also involved with the Highway 8 reinstatement. And one observation we might make there is the fundamental importance of information sharing across the various ministries that might have different responsibilities, maybe for the roads or for the communities, but very much a shared need for a common understanding of those watersheds, the hydrology, the hydraulics, and the mapping. It may be that they have very specific needs for their own asset risks that might be held sometimes even in confidence if it's a pipeline operator. But the information sharing around the watershed really benefits from being shared. And the work it's just been an indispensable part of the work along the Nicola Valley, the abilities of all parties affected to be able to share their resources to manage their risks. The second piece you mentioned regarded dike standards. The unusually rapidly, compared to some other of the areas that we've been working in, changing climate is forcing questions up and down the Nicola Valley around how to make decisions to manage flood risk. It has been traditionally the case that jurisdictions pick a hazard standard, a fixed standard, the 200-year, make their dike plus a bit of freeboard meet that standard, and that meets the regulation. In some instances, in today's changing climate, meeting a 200-year standard with the effects of climate change, which could be several dozen% increase in flows over the next 50 to 80 years, is a very costly, potentially prohibitively costly endeavor that could either be thought of as a raising of the standards or a reduction of the standards, or, and this is where we are really seeing it, a shift in how that question is asked. And that shift is towards what risks are a community willing to tolerate, and to develop some decision-making criteria around risk tolerance, such that the most effective risk reduction can be achieved with the resources that are available. One of the challenges we've seen over and over is that if the hazard standard is too high, then nothing can be done because everything can't be done. And so in cases such as Merritt or downstream, thinking about risk tolerance, and thinking about really putting in place the best protection that can be afforded is going to be a key part of risk management planning. That might be structural, and in the shortest term, it's very likely to be non-structural and planning related. And then in terms of DMAF, just one last comment there. We do agree regarding build back better as opposed to build back the same. The DMAF funding does require that communities justify that there's a favorable cost benefit ratio associated with their projects that does require risk assessment. But there are ways to do that can think about some intangibles as well as life safety that can help communities make a decision that's informed by all of the different risks they face that are a little bit beyond the infrastructure that's typically looked at. So lots of my answer as well. But the main question is really a shift towards risk-informed decision-making that's needed in the changing climate.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? No, seeing no hands in the air. Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.
We move on to item 6.2, building infraction expired permit, an opportunity for the owners to make representation. Is there anyone here to speak to this item?
There is not.
Thank you very much. And item 6.3, building infraction stop work order in area P. Is there anyone here to speak to this item?
There's not.
All right, we move on to 7.1, building infraction expired permit 1051 Green Lake Road, Green Lake South Road in area E. And I will note that the recommendation is changing to note that the notice will only be filed on or after September 15th, 2023, if the building permit remains incomplete. I understand staff have been working with the property owner towards compliance. So the motion is that the corporate officer be authorized to file a notice pursuant to the authority of section 57 of the community charter on the title of Leslie Taylor and Scott Taylor of 1051 Green Lake South Road. Notice only to be filed on or after September 15th, 2023, if the building permit remains incomplete.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair
Second.
Smith. Second, Director Blackwell. Are there any questions or comments regarding this item? Seeing and hearing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 7.2, building infraction stop work order on 8655 Holding Road in area P. We do have a recommendation which remains unaltered. Director Thorpe moves the recommendation, second by Director Morris. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this item? No, seeing or hearing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 8.1, zoning amendment bylaw 2716 in electoral area B. We have a couple of recommendations here. All right, thank you very much. Seconder, Director Blackwell, thank you. All right, who's going to stop seconding? So everyone else get your hands ready. All right, and any discussion or comments on this recommendation? No, seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, carried, and we have a second recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Vice Chair Smith, thank you. Director Getz seconds that. Any discussion or comments on this item? On the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Zoning amendment bylaw number 2815. We do have two recommendations. Just a note on the second recommendation regarding the public hearing. That public hearing will be held on the evening of Wednesday, July the 12th here at the TNRD building. So we have recommendation number 1.
Second.
Director Stankey, seconded by Vice Chair Smith. Discussion? No. On the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And recommendation regarding said public hearing.
Move this, move the second recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Smith. Do I have a seconder? Second, Director Ranta, thank you. Any discussion? So Directors Houghton and Hayward and Smith, I will see you all on July the 12th. On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.3, Green Lake Area and OCP Amendment Bylaw. We
Move the
do,
recommendation.
thank you. And seconded by Director Ranta, was that? We'll go with Director Ranta. This public hearing will also be held on July the 12th, Wednesday, July the 12th, here at the TNRD building in the evening. So this is clearly the place to be on the evening of Wednesday, July the 12th. Any discussion on this? All right, on the question, all those, Director Houghton, you're laughing. And wait till the 12th of July. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 9.1, Agricultural Land Commission application number 218 in Area I, and I am going to hand this to the General Manager of Development Services to speak to. She looks surprised. It says it right here in my notes, honestly. It says,
I'm not sure what I'm not sure exactly where I was supposed to go with this, but I can go anywhere with it. So there I go. The recommendation is to support. This is, you may have smelt it going by the Trans-Canada Highway between Thompson River Estates and Cache Creek. This facility has been there as a mushroom composting facility since I think 2004. At this point, this is an ALR referral for the purposes of a non-farm use on ALR land. Depending on what the ALC says, if they approve it, it will come back to this board as a rezoning application. And I think what I was supposed to speak to is clarify, why is it on some farms on ALR land you can do this without a rezoning and others you can't? So it simply has to do with the scale of the operation. So this is not biosolids, this is food scraps, wood waste. It recycles under a ministry permit, and it must comply with the organic matter recycling regulation. If the materials were to be recycled at a scale where 50% of them are applied to the parcel. So for example, just pick on Douglas Lake Ranch because it's the biggest one and they have a lot of land, and they could probably take 100% of this kind of compost. Then they wouldn't need a rezoning application. But in this case, it's a smaller parcel. It would not, there is farming or forage production on both sides of it to the east and west, but those are different operations, different property. So in this case, because of the size and because they will be selling the product to area farms and ranches, it will come back as a rezoning application. Is that, I think that's what I was supposed to explain.
thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this item? Pardon me?
Do we need to move in second first?
That would be a very good idea. Thank you, Director Thorpe.
Sorry.
All right, Director Houghton moves and Director Thorpe seconds. Thank you. Now, is there any discussion? Director Thorpe.
Thank you. I have some concerns about this, and I'm going to be voting against this recommendation. My concerns are looking at the map. There is a huge riparian area within where they're looking to develop wetlands. I'm worried about small plastic particulates. I'm concerned about vermin being attracted to the area and what that will do with food chain and the wildlife. I know that there's economic benefits to this, but I have a feeling that there will be detriment to the economic benefits in that tourism, the odor that's emitted from that. I've driven by it a number of times and you can smell it coming up the hill from Cache Creek. I know that just to the Savannah side that is often used as a filming location by the Film Commission. And I think if we have nasty odors, that might impact our Film Commission. Another thing to look at is Bonaparte First Nations is looking to develop the Maccabee fossil site. And that is right near the Maccabee fossil site. I know that at this point we don't consult with Bonaparte, but I think we could have some unhappy neighbors if this happens and they're trying to promote tourism. I've looked at it backwards and forwards, and I'm concerned too that it started off as a mushroom farm and then it turned into this composting facility. They weren't following the rules then. There were smells then. Now we're going to enlarge it. We've got all of these detrimental things that I perceive as detrimental. And how do we know that these people are now going to so-called follow the rules? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Thorpe. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, Director Oswald and then Director Hodden.
Onslow. That's okay. We've got a few more years together.
I've got 3 more years to get it right.
Yeah. Just my question. So hearing Tricia's concerns, the recommendation here is actually just to go to the Agricultural Land Commission and they would make the decision, or I'm just not totally sure about what our recommendation is.
Ms. Sadilkova?
So this proposal as it is presented now would need ALC approval, a ministry permit and a rezoning. At this point, this report covers the ALC only, but we didn't want to surprise anybody later. That's why we wrote this with the notice about the rezoning. The ALC this as a referral agency can recommend for or against, or just forward an application with no comment, or can kill an application before it goes to the ALC.
Director Hodden?
Yeah, this particular piece of ground used to belong to the Christian Ranch and they sold that to the mushroom composting facility a number of years ago and then sold the subsequent ranch to CN Rail for ballast rock. So I don't know, have these folks contacted their neighbors, like the folks at the Sunland Ranch and the folks live down the road in Cache Creek? Because I know it does create quite an odor. And that is one of my concerns too, is I know the material in that present site. I know some of the farmers around there won't spread it on their land because it contains a lot of plastic in it. So what they've been doing is filling that riparian area with the stuff because nobody wants to take it, because if it was good stuff, I know Donaldson's Dairy Farm and Semlin Ranch would take it all, but I know there's some concerns there about the quality of the product. Thank you.
So I am not entirely clear on who's offered to buy it or does not wish to buy it. That's beyond kind of our scope. I can say that there's quite a few ranchers on our Agricultural Advisory Commission, and Chris Porter from Desert Hills Farm is also. They were very familiar with this particular piece of land. And it was discussed at length in this room at the May 30th Agriculture Advisory Commission. In the end, they recommended it, which is one reason why staff, we almost always, if not always, follow their lead because they are the experts, but they did question, the representatives were at that meeting and they questioned the plastic or non-organics. And there is a limit under OMAR, how much there can be. According to the delegates at that meeting, it's 1%, but it looks like more because the plastic rises to the top of the windrows when composting. So that was, they definitely acknowledged that there is plastic in it. They did say that, again, they were asked about the marketing. One of the concerns that our Agriculture Advisory Commission cited is the extent of hard surfacing of the land. Because to do the composting, it requires to be on either a concrete or a protected membrane, so it doesn't seep into the groundwater. They were aware it was wet. But going back to your initial question about who's going to be buying it, I don't know, and I can't answer that. Yeah. The neighbors would, if it does get approval, and that could take a year, because that's about how long it takes these days with the ALC. There is a public process and a rezoning where like this, these reports, yeah, sometimes people might look at our agenda. We do have people from the area and they all know each other. They're familiar with the history of the land and the Christian Ranch, but there is no public notification process at this stage.
Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some context from the solid waste perspective. So our staff, TNRD staff, as well as city staff toured this facility just a couple months ago. And in the discussion about the feedstock, I think it's helpful for this discussion. So what this facility is receiving curbside organic material from municipalities throughout the province. The reason we toured it was to look at the opportunities for TNRD material. And that's not necessarily directly, could be TNRD trucks going there. It could also be though a location, it currently is a location where commercial outfits, commercial collection companies who collect organics have a location to bring it. So currently, this is the only location within reasonable driving distance of Kamloops that takes commercial organics. So I think it's important to discuss that our solid waste management plan has the very top objective is to reduce organic waste to landfill. This facility is doing exactly that, and that's what it's designed to do. And that's what they're permitted to do within the regulation. So I can answer any further questions about that. And I also bring that up because the plastic that ends up in there is because people put plastic in their organics bins at curbside collection. So that's an issue that all of us in the solid waste side need to struggle with informing our users on proper composting or diversion.
Thank you. I have Directors Sao, Getz, Jim Smith, and Middleton on my list. So Director Sao.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just want to confirm one more time with Ms. Sadikova. So if I get what you were saying right, there is one more final gate when it comes to rezoning, would be when it comes to this board, and there is also a public consultation part. That's my first question.
So yes, there is rezoning. It has already, an application has already been made, but there's no point in processing it because the ALC is typically the higher order of government. However, if this board is quite convinced it wouldn't support a rezoning, they can. To my knowledge, that's never happened, that an application has been stopped by this board. But as far as I'm aware, you have that right. Typically, if the board is not in support of an application, they will recommend to the ALC to deny it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And secondly, is it possible for us to request staff to begin consulting with two parties, the Bonaparte ban and also the Thompson-Nicola Film Commission, what Director Thorpe was saying the impacts are, and for them to come back with recommendations or reports?
If we can, and we would at the stage of the rezoning, I believe, and I'm trying to find it in the report, that there has been some communication by the proponents with Skitchison Indian Band, which may be in closer proximity.
Okay, thank you.
Director Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Thorpe brought up something that twigged my mind. Has there been any infractions on record for this group so far, or have they been okay, or have we had issues? Just curious.
So the property conveyed last fall. I believe the scope, like in the permit, it stipulates how much material can be processed. I think they exceeded that somewhat. But I can't, whether that, what scale of infraction, I would have to look into that. I think I can't answer that right now.
Director Jim Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious as to whether there's been any kind of public consultation or permit changes from the time when this company first started operating on the property, which was mushroom composting, which is totally different than what they're doing today. So did they go through a process to from when they first started? And is it the same company? I don't know that for sure, but if it's the same company, they're not doing today what they started off doing a few years ago.
In the early 2000s, they went through a process for ALC approval, but there was no rezoning. So ALR applications, other than exclusions, don't go through a public process. Unless, I mean, the board can defer that. At this point, because I haven't been able to answer all your questions very fully, it may be a thought, can't see through this thing, to what is the word, defer this application until the next board meeting where we can bring back all those answers in detail. The report does cover the 2004 process, but the change in ownership, because there's several different companies involved. The proponents now own the land. Previously, under the mushroom composting operation, it was leased. Am I allowed to suggest that?
If I may, we already have a motion on the floor to support it. So I'll defer to.
What would be
Chair.
the easiest and cleanest way? Because my thinking is that if we vote against that, then we are doing the opposite of supporting. We are not supporting, and that is not the intent. The intent is to defer discussion of this till another meeting. So do we table it? Should we ask for, should the motion be withdrawn?
I would suggest that the motion be withdrawn. But that's only if Director Thorpe wants to withdraw her motion.
She did.
What are the implications of withdrawing it? It's going to go back for.
Then that
more
would
information?
so that would allow another member to raise the motion to have it deferred to a future meeting so that staff can bring back additional information.
I can do that.
Is this who is the seconder? Director Houghton, are you okay? Are you okay with the motion being withdrawn?
If that's the wishes. Seems like there's some sensitivity here on this one. So.
Before the motion is withdrawn, though, I do have Directors Middleton, Vice Chair Smith, and Director Getz who would like to speak to it. So I think we should, since they've had their name on the list, we should allow them to speak to the motion on the floor before it gets withdrawn. And then I'd just like to add something as well. So Director Middleton.
Thank you. I think my question was really answered, and that was, where's all this stuff coming from, and are we processing basically out of area composting? So are we bringing the entire, lower mainland? It just basically, it sounded like from everywhere in BC. And thinking that the way our population is growing and where these things coming from, that this site will expand itself in a significant way, probably as it goes, if there's not a lot of other options out there in BC. And I would be concerned, as you indicated that they had already had one violation of their permit by over or exceeding their allowable volume. So could that potentially be something that would ramp itself up considerably?
And Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. I'm wondering whether there's any onus on the owners for odor mitigation for that facility. Like, is there any odor mitigation rules that would apply to that facility that they have to look after?
So under the permit, short answer, if it's part of a farm, production? No, not by local government. However, the Farm Industry Practices Review Board can step in as a tribunal and determine if they're doing something that is not a normal farm practice that generates more smell, that's not okay. But if it's a normal level of smell that would be associated with that activity, then yes, that's the case. In terms of land use, if the rezoning passed for allowing the use and the use had a certain level of smell, then that goes with the use, really. I've never seen there's nuisance bylaws. And we have a nuisance bylaw, the noise regulations bylaw, or the unsightly premises. In this case, I can't comment on the smell because for the scale that's proposed, I don't know.
Director Getz, you had a follow-up?
Actually, I'll let you go because I was just going to make a motion to defer, so.
Director Ranta.
There's no doubt that when the facility was utilized to produce mushroom compost, my understanding is that it was straw and chicken manure that created the odor to create the mushroom compost. And there's no question that it was very, very malodorous. And when you drive, Cache Creek is only 7 kilometers away. And I phoned up Mr. Lambert and asked, isn't there something you can do about the odor? And he suggested that he was within regulations or doing what was required of him as far as his composting operation went. But when he switched to composting organics from the Lower Mainland, the odor substantially subsided. And when I drive past that facility, it used to be that it just about turned your nostrils inside out, smelling that driving by. But now there's no impact whatsoever. It doesn't smell at all. So I think what I would ask staff to do is consider some process that would prevent the owners from reverting back to mushroom composting, which creates a terrible odor, and make that as a condition of approval for their facility.
Thank you, Director Ranta. I'll just note one last thing. In May of 2020, there was a fire. Spontaneous combustion started at the site. It was on private property, did not threaten any nearby structures, communities, or crown land, so was outside the jurisdiction of BC Wildfire Service. Also, there is no local fire protection in that area. And an article in the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal at the time notes, local governments, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, the RAP, Report All Poachers and Polluters Line, BC Wildfire, and the Ministry of Environment all received calls and emails of complaint about the heavy acrid smoke generated by the smoldering fire. It lingered in the area for several days. That is the most noticeable instance of smell associated with that facility since it ceased being a mushroom composting facility. I will note that Mr. Lambert, the manager, took every effort to extinguish the fire as quickly as possible, and I believe did do so as expeditiously as possible. But while it lasted, it was extremely nasty. So we have agreement from Director Thorpe and Director Houghton to withdraw the motion that was on the floor. So that, Director Getz, so that leaves the way clear to introduce a new motion. Director Getz.
With the, thank you, Madam Chair, with the information that's come forward and some springing some information on that wasn't prepared, I think we should defer to the next meeting.
Thank you. And Corporate Officer Campbell, I just want to make sure that defer is the correct way to do this rather than table or.
That's correct, because you want to defer it to the next meeting.
All right, so Director Getz is asking that we defer consideration of this until the next meeting, and Director Thorpe is going to second that. Is there any discussion on this motion? Director Lepso?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the report. And I see on page 6, the application has discussed plans with the owner. They're committed to taking consultation with Skeechin Indian Band. And they're also going to talk to the neighboring farms. It sounds like from staff, this is something we might be needing in the future. And what do I have on page 7? In the report, to be clear, the ALC application is forwarded for non-farm use only. If approved by the ALC, then the proposed zoning bylaw amendments will align. Oh, here's the one I wanted. If approved by the ALC, then the owner's zoning bylaw amendment application will be referred to the participating agencies for additional comments. A full rezoning report will then be presented to the TNRD board for adjudication. So I'm just, to me, it looks like everything's in order when I read the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on the motion on the floor? Director Getz.
Just a point of order, and I've asked this before, when a motion is deferred, there's no debate. Is that correct? I do believe once a motion is deferred, there's no further debate on the motion.
It is debatable.
I debate that.
Depends which version of Robert's rules you're looking at.
Director Rain.
I was just questioning, does a motion to defer not override a motion on the floor? Just point of procedure.
So I can get back to you on that, Director Rain, but my understanding is like to table a motion that it would, but my understanding is to actually defer a motion. It's not, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Any further discussion or comment? So on the motion to defer this so that staff can gather more information, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? We have Director Blackwell and Director Lepso opposed. No one online is opposed. The motion is carried. Item 9.2, Agricultural Land Commission application number 219 in electoral area P. We do have a staff recommendation.
So moved.
Director Blackwell, seconded by Director Laird. Discussion? Any discussion, questions, or comments on this particular item? We're all discussioned out on ALC applications, possibly. On the question, then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 9.3, oh, I might have spoken too soon. Agricultural Land Commission application number 222. We do have a staff recommendation. Thank you, Director O'Reilly. Second by Director Ranta. Thank you. Discussion. Anyone else remember room 222? I'm dating myself. Oh, I see a few smiles. I'm not the only one. All right. Discussion, questions, comments? Oh, Director Houghton?
Were all these talked about at the agricultural advisory panel and recommended to come here for approval? Is that correct?
Yes, they all are ALR applications, go through the ALC. Oh, pardon me, there's too many acronyms. Our Agriculture Advisory Commission, they only have the power to make a recommendation. And we almost, as I said, we almost always take their recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 10.1, I will turn it over to CAO Hildebrandt for his report.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Good afternoon, Board of Directors. I just have a handful of updates for you today, starting with, in my opinion, the most critical, important one, and that being emergency operations and preparedness with respect to the upcoming wildfire season. This topic, as you all know, has been trending all over the country with concerns about wildfire and the very early trends that we are seeing and experiencing, not to mention the hot and dry expected summer ahead of us. We as an organization are also very concerned and are doing everything we can to be prepared as best we can for the possibility of significant wildfire season. I've recently sent you the most recent forecast and data from the province, and the news is far from favorable. We are continuing to share messaging on social media, communications around this important topic. On June 1st, we had a news release go out about fire smart preparedness. We are also currently planning to put out another reminder on social media about the Voyant Alert and how important that tool is. Our spring 2023 regional newsletter had information about the importance of Fire Smart and of registering for Voyant Alert as well. We partnered with the City of Kamloops and to Kamloops and Voyant Alert on a Voyant Alert awareness news release in late April. And in mid-May, we issued a news release about wildfire season preparedness. So we're doing our best to try to get the message out. We've also created an easy to remember web link at tnrd.ca/beprepared to take people to our webpage with links to all resources that they may need before, during, or after an emergency event. So this discussion and information is unfortunately much earlier than we would have liked and sooner than ever expected. We are all need to be aware of the environment around us, and we encourage our residents to be prepared for the summer ahead. So just a quick note on that. With respect to Fire Smart specifically, we talked a bit about it in the chair's opening comments, but as you will be aware, the TNRD was successful in securing a grant of $200,000 and 10 $50,000 grants, one for each electoral area, for a total of $700,000. So how are we using that funding? So number one, we've secured a contractor through a bid process to develop 10, and the acronym is CWRPs, and that's just a Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. And we'll have these complete by December 2023. Completing 10 plans before the end of the year is no small task, and it's taking regular coordination between the TNRD and the contractor. But I can say the process is going very well. We expect to be done on time. The 10 plans must be done before we can reapply for next year's grant funding. So this is the single largest priority moving forward with the Fire Smart program. Number two, we have hired a full-time Fire Smart coordinator to manage the program for the TNRD. So Daniel Funk started his role with the TNRD on May 3rd. We are in the process of establishing a Fire Smart staff committee, which is a requirement to maintain our funding through the next year, and that's in process. Establishing a public presence is also very important. This has already started with staff participating in multiple community information sessions in and around the TNRD. Education is another priority for us. We have ordered our informational supplies, and as soon as they arrive, we'll be setting up in public markets, fairs, community events, et cetera, and liaising with many community and First Nation communities and groups to enable and encourage Fire Smart programs. And then finally, we need to build and submit our 2024 grant. So everything I've talked about will be the foundation of what that grant will be. This will begin in late September. We will be building on the foundation, like I said, of this work with the hopes that we can bring options to homeowners for possible mitigation and grants for 2024. So a lot of work going on, and we are certainly keeping our fingers crossed for this this fire season to hopefully we have some positive outcomes, because it's not looking good as we see it today. Moving on to my next topic, bit of a happier news. The 2023 to 2026 board strategic plan sits in front of you. The formal adoption is in the next agenda item on today's agenda. Our staff has done a lot of work pulling your feedback and information together. And I know our staff team is aligned to ensure that we can execute against these important priorities that the board has identified. So upon the successful adoption by the board, we will send out a press release and continue to share this information out to residents. Topic 3 was just a quick update on the TNRD Accessibility Advisory Committee. I'm very pleased to share that our Accessibility Advisory Committee has been formed. This committee has 10 members, including Directors Blackwell and Directors Hayward. It'll meet 4 times over the next year and help us to guide the creation of the TNRD's accessibility plan. It'll also provide feedback after the plan is created later this year. We will be launching a public engagement opportunity later in the month to get residents' feedback on accessibility. We will also have information to share We'll have information, we'll have a news release going out once this feedback period is over. And the committee actually just met this past Tuesday for the first meeting. It was very successful. And then finally, renovations and transitions update. I'm pleased to say that we're very close to being done. We should have everything complete by Monday. The anticipated turnover will be Monday, with the final occupancy coming from the city of Kamloops on June 21st. This is on our 3rd floor. Furniture install will be happening immediately, with our Operations and Film Commission staff transitioning to their new space over the next few weeks. One of the biggest priorities within this renovation, as you know, is the creation of our new Emergency Operations Center, and the timing could not be better. The emergency management team is very excited about this new space, and we are in the process of planning for the new furniture and technology equipment, which will set us up for success much more than our previous setup. This entire project was extremely important for a number of reasons, including proper working space, an efficient and organized department structure, capacity and future growth opportunities, and most importantly, increased staff engagement. So thank you to Ian and Dawn for all their hard work in making this renovation successful. So feel free, next time you're in the building, to pop down to the 3rd floor and you can see some of the changes that have happened. And with that, I'll leave it to any questions from the board of directors.
Thank you, CEO Hildebrand. Anyone have any questions? I see Director Grenier. Anyone else? Director Grenier, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hildebrand. I just had the opportunity to speak with, I think it's Jeremy, who's handling this Fire Smart initiative, and that deadline's coming up December 31st to have those reports so that we qualify for the 2024s. What I understand, is there any community feedback that's going to be asked for, or some engagement with the community in preparation of those reports? I'm thinking that the communities, the 10 electoral areas, probably want to have some participation in that in order to have buy-in for whatever comes out of the report.
Absolutely. And thank you for the question, Director Gani. That's part of the consultant's role, is to, when they build those resiliency plans, is to get feedback and advice from the 10 electoral areas, because each plan is separate by electoral area. So there will be 10 of them.
Supplementary, Director Gani.
Thank you. And so I've got a number of constituents in different communities now that really want to jump on this Fire Smart bandwagon. We're sort of saying, hang on, we're getting it together. But if there was an opportunity to give them some kind of date or some kind of feedback mechanism, that would be really helpful in my dialogue with them.
Yeah, thank you again for the question. I can follow up through Mr. Vieira and through Jeremy to maybe provide an email out to the electoral areas to provide a bit of guidance on that. Thank you.
Any other questions or questions for CEO Hildebrand on his report? Seeing no hands, thank you very much, CEO Hildebrand. We move on to item 10.1.2, approval of the 2023-2026 strategic plan.
So
Director Laird, seconded by Director Ranta. Is there any discussion? Thank you to staff for pulling together all of our input and questions and comments and ramblings and suggestions into this very elegant report. Any questions or comments from anyone? On the motion then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, that is carried. Item 10.1.3, statement of financial information. Yes, it is Sophie season. And we do have two recommendations.
Move recommendation 1.
Moved by Vice Chair Smith, seconded by Director Ranta. Recommendation 1. Any discussion, questions? No, on the motion then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And second recommendation. Thank you. I did not see who either of those two people were. They were both Director O'Reilly and Director Hall. Was that the seconder? Director Ranta, thank you. Questions or comments here? No. On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. All right. Big deep breath before item 10.1.4, regional grants and sponsorship 2023 spring intake. It is still technically spring. I will just note that. We have 3 separate recommendations here involving multiple requests, so we are going to be dealing with them one at a time. I would like to thank staff for finding funding for these requests and for this elegant and equitable solution. CFO Fox, did you have anything that you wanted to say at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Roden. I appreciate the comments. We did feel like this was a reasonable solution, given that I know in the past there was more comfort around making a recommendation without the policy. We really wanted to put this forward, show where this is difficult to support the work we're going to do in the policy and bring back in the fall. The funds that are available through the economic development services that are there. I just want to point out that throughout the budget presentation, those documents were provided. So if you are wanting to look at where those funds are coming from, they are under the community services department, and they are throughout the budget document. I'd also like to point out that this was an item that was going to be brought to the board this fall as well for discussion, because again, there is not really a policy there to guide the way these funds are being spent. There's area A and B do have specific economic development functions where the other areas are very general. The funds that are being used or recommended to be used at this time had been put on hold. No funds were being expended from those accounts. I do have accounting to tell you what might be left if you hadn't looked or done that. And it just so happened that a number of these requests fit into those areas quite well. I wanted to give the opportunity to give that information, and I know that there might have been questions in regards to those funds sitting there. Further, the funds that are in those economic development services were not taxed for this year. Those were specifically surplus amounts that were remaining that were carried forward. So the amount available is available from surplus dollars. There are a couple items, if it wasn't clear, that were left out of the recommendation, and that was for, if you just bear with me, I'm going to run to grab a spreadsheet here. Western Canada Theatre Society for $5,000, and for the Kamloops Symphony Society of $5,000. So as you're making motions, we try to make motions with the grant funds available. And hopefully it's fairly straightforward. I'll turn it back over and we'll field the questions as they come.
Thank you very much. I do have something to say about KSS and WCT, but that can wait for a moment. The anticipation. So the first recommendation is that the board approve the regional grant and aid requests, and this is for $5,000 to Kamloops Food Policy Council and $5,000 to Kamloops Aboriginal Friendship Society. So that is the first recommendation. Directors Bass and Eustater move in second. Is there any discussion on this recommendation? Director Graham?
Just one quick question. I've been led to believe that Aboriginal folks have a stream, funding stream from the federal government. Okay, thank you. The question was, I was led to believe that the federal government is their funding stream. Why are they coming to us for this Aboriginal Friendship Society?
Any staff care to speak to that regarding the Aboriginal Friendship Society? This is different from the funding that Kamloops-Tishaquetmik recently announced from this is nothing to do with the Healing Center, correct? Director Blackfeld, do you have a clarification?
Just knowing the Aboriginal Friendship Society in Clearwater is not associated with any local band. It's made up of members of First Nations from all across Canada. So it's and generally is not part of treaty or settlement or anything else. It's a separate organization from standard funding of First Nations.
So it would stand outside the stream of normal First Nations funding. Okay, thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Director Graham?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this motion? All right, we will take a vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. We move on to the second recommendation, and this involves Project X Theatre Production Society and the BC Rural Center Society. Moved by Director Thorpe. Second by Director Hayward. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Now, we are going, the next recommendation initially involved 6 separate organizations. We are going to change that. So the first recommendation will deal with number 5, the Kamloops Exhibition Association only. This one, Director Houghton has a conflict of interest on this point, which is why we are dealing with this on its own. Director Houghton?
To recuse myself from this, I am involved with the Winter Fair Committee that is seeking these funds, so I'll just recuse myself from this motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I wanted to mention for the benefit of board members who are joining us this year for the first term that the Kamloops Exhibition Association and the British Columbia Agricultural Exposition used to be one entity. They split somewhat acrimoniously a few years ago. So for the last few years, each of when they were one entity, they used to ask the TNRD for $5,000. Now they are 2 entities, each asking for $5,000. I'm not great at math, but that equals $10,000. The practice of the board for the last term was to reduce the amount to $2,500 for each organization, equaling the $5,000 that they used to get when they were one single organization. So I would like to move that the Kamloops Exhibition Association be funded in the amount of $2,500, with the $2,500 remaining to be allocated elsewhere. Director Bass, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Vice Chair Smith?
I'm just wondering if there's anything, I thought we had some discussion somewhere along the way about funding and coming back sort of annually, and only funding for, say, 2 or 3 years. So I'm kind of curious about these 2 groups because I feel like they've been back quite a bit. I don't think we've ever said no. So I'm just curious if I'm right about that.
Thank you. CFO Fox.
Thank you through to Chair Roden and the directors. So the policy kind of leads you to believe that it follows the term of the directors. So because this was a new term of the directors, it allows the new directors to take ownership over that decision. It was a bit ambiguous and we didn't have really a clear understanding. So what we tried to do is provide you in a column the amounts that they had been receiving, so that if the board felt uncomfortable providing continuous funding, that be their choice not to continue. I would like to look to Kim McMillan, who's here to kind of back me up today, to just see if she has further comment on that.
No. Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think so. Is it working?
I don't think so.
No, oh, gee, big spot. That's absolutely right. The way it's written in the policy is it's only supposed to be, I think it's 2 times a year or 2 times in your guys' term. So this is a bunch of new directors and it's a new term. So it really is up to you on whether you want to fund them again this year. But moving forward, that's definitely something we're going to address in the policy and change in the policy. So it's black and white, because you are right, 100%. These groups do come back every single year, and this isn't meant to be an annual stream of funding. So this isn't the only 2 groups that have this. Multiple groups have come back over the time frame. So is that answer?
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
I have, excuse me, I have Director Getz, Director Middleton, and Director Grenier. Director Getz
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just
and Director Sal.
the way we do it in Merit is we fund these groups 2 years. Near the end of the second year, we give them a letter letting them know that we need to make room for someone else. But if this is a group that can take the funding and times it by 2 or 3, we continue to support them every year because it becomes their way of getting more funding, such as our Arts Council. We put them in every single year and have been since I've been in council in 2008, but they turn that into $15,000. And without that contribution, they cannot continue to operate. But for groups that come back more than 2 years, by the end of the second year, we've let them know that this is their final year and it's time to find some other funding. What we also do is we make sure that we see a fundraising portfolio for them for the year, because if you're not willing to raise funds for your own group, you shouldn't be coming to ask us for any money. And at the end of all of this, I'd still like to see a report on what they did with the money and if it was all used correctly as they asked for. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, a number of communities have grant writers who are able to assist small organizations in finding grants so that they are not constantly dependent on one source. I have Directors Middleton, Grenier, Sal, and Hamer Jackson in that order. So Director Middleton.
On these, when we have the KXA Association and then we have the BC Agricultural Exposition, indicating that they were at one point in time happy campers and now they're not. Where does 4-H fit in this and the Provincial Winter Fair? Only under the Kamloops Exhibition Association, and or what does the BC Agricultural Exposition do by way of an event or a function that they would be requiring the funds for?
I believe that both have a 4-H component. I understand from the local 4-H club in Ashcroft Cache Creek that they can only go to one, just because it is such a drain on the finances of the participants, et cetera. So they have to choose which one they send their participants to. But it's my understanding that both of them do have a 4-H component to them.
So supplementary then, please. So where is the BC Agricultural Exposition held? Is that part of, like, we're not talking the Armstrong Fair, or are we talking Barrier Fall Fair, or like where is that specific event located?
I believe Director Hayward has the answer to this.
They call it the BC Ag Expo, which is probably what you've seen advertised more than their official name. They happen at the Agriplex in Barrier. They took over the whole fairgrounds. It's a huge event. And it is all about 4-H. And then they have a huge auction sale at the end of it. It sort of was the Breakaway Baptist in 2012, but things have changed over time. And BC Ag Expo has grown exponentially huge. And the Kamloops Exhibition Association, which used to be the winter fair for 4-H, has slowly lost entries because they're both on the same weekend. So there's a plan right now in the works to have them on different weekends so that they are working together to help their kids all have an opportunity. I just want to add here that I'm in agreement that we shouldn't keep funding the same group every year, because then that becomes their budget. But I do know that both of these organizations have already created their budget for the year. They do a lot of fundraising, they do a lot of auction sales, they do a lot of everything all year. And they're coming into the end result of their, so to take their funding away totally when they have been here for so long would be pretty tough on them, but I sure don't have an argument with cutting it. and letting them know in advance that, you know, you got to stand on your own feet. But just bear in mind that these are youth organizations, 100% youth organizations, and they both do a really, really good job in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hayward. I have Director Grenier next.
Thank you, Chair. I just, from electoral area J, there are only so many societies and so many organizations in electoral area J. They seem to be the same ones. So we've got folks from Savannah, we've got folks in Lac Lejeune, don't have a society in Cherry Creek, do have a society in the North Valley. And I anticipate that as we start using our discretionary funds, we may run into a problem. So in the analysis of staff, looking at how many times can you go back to the well, maybe there's some consideration as to how many groups actually qualify, because on this Savannah Community Association, it's actually a ramp for the Heritage Museum. They're not a society. It's owned by the Savannah Community Association, the building. So I can't give it to the Heritage Museum. I got to give it to the society who then gives it to the Heritage Museum. And that's the runaround. But at the end of the day, we're trying to help the groups that are trying to do good things in our area. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Sal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, excuse me. Just a question about when those two groups split and their grant amount effectively halved. Has either of them reflected back to the board that they faced any hardship because of the halving of the grants? Any difficulties that they, events they weren't able to hold because of that?
No, they did make presentations back in the day to come to ask for the funding and to explain what they did, and they never expressed that cutting the funding had caused them any hardship. They did thank us for our support. Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, it sounds like they're fundraising and stuff like that, and I'm just wondering if they're asking for $5,000, if there's a good reason for that. And I'm wondering what this funding is for, if we know what this funding is for, and also the pluses and the minuses or pros and cons to not giving them the funding, for youth.
CFO Fox.
So in part of the current application, I do receive some information about other funding sources. So for example, which one are we dealing with? Yeah, okay. For example, it's showing they've received $50,000 for a BC gaming grant, I'm assuming. They received some funding, $5,000 from the city of Kamloops, and other sponsorship is showing at another $50,000. Their total cost of the project event is $150,000. So our $5,000 or $2,500, whatever you choose to fund for them, is really a drop in the bucket and not going to make a difference probably either way. We don't know what it is specifically used for. It doesn't lay out that it's saying that it's going to go for whatever. Some note parking attendance, some note, I don't know, just general, whatever operating costs. So I think moving forward, that's just definitely something I'm going to put in the application to find out what they are doing, and then reporting back to me to determine if they use the funds appropriately. But I think these amounts are so small in consideration of what their budget is. I don't think that we would know or it would matter. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
So it doesn't look like any kids are going to miss out if we cut it back a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't want to say that for sure because it's still a large amount of money regardless. But I think that it's a drop. Like some of their budgets are $12,000. And if we took away 5,000 of that, that's a substantial amount. But when their project is $150,000, the 5,000 or the 2,500 doesn't make as much of an impact And I think that there is some entry fees that they do receive with people come and watch and participate. So that's also somehow how they make some revenue as well.
Thank you.
Director Thorpe.
Thank you. Just a point of clarity for staff. So when we're talking about these grants, the way we're doing it this year is a one-off. And normally it would be, say, the 10,000, or if we decided to increase it, it will be different than we're doing it this time. And if I understand correctly, if somebody applies this year, and we're basically accepting from the look of this, everybody this year, then next year, in theory, anybody that applied, we could maybe say no to, because we can only accept them twice in a 4-year term. And then the supplemental to that is when it's actually a point that you just made about admissions. So when we're looking at these grants, some of these places are charging admissions of different. How do we factor that in when we're looking at an application? How do we know if they're charging $250 to go into something, or if they're charging $60? So there's a significant, how do we factor that in, please and thanks.
CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you. And through you to Director Thorpe, we are bringing back a fulsome policy that'll kind of explore all the feedback you've given us. And then the policy committee will help us to define exactly what the path goes forward. But if we're going to go that deep in understanding all those details, it's going to take a significant amount of time. So we want to try to bring a streamlined process. And there's lots of examples of those out there. So we will bring that back before September or in September to the policy committee, and then bring it to the board for approval, which will address all the questions that you have.
Director Newstater and then Director Morris.
Thank you to the chair. This is our second conversation about funding and funding models and allocations to community groups. And I do wonder whether it might be helpful with a varied amount of experience in this room around funding and funding applications, whether it might be worthwhile for staff to put together a small report or something that shows how we walk through a process like this to evaluate these applications. I think it might be helpful to get everyone on the same page to understand what is considered the hoops that groups jump through in order to obtain funding like this, and how critical it is to their operations and functions. And the fact is, removing $5,000 from a budget will always have an impact on events like this, on groups like this. And they put a lot of work and time into making sure that it's possible. And I also had a question. So that's a suggestion through to staff to consider. And then I had a question around the application, whether there's a question about sustainability, because that's often a really helpful question to ask in the applications, especially when you're talking about tapering off funding. So whether that policy looks like we will fund for 2 years, we will fund for 3 years, often that's a tapered thing. We will fund 10 in the first year, 5 in the next year, 2,500 in the third year. However, we decide to model that. Asking about sustainability of the project without the funding often helps inform the priority use of that pot of funds as well. So just curious if there is a question around financial sustainability in there. And that often demonstrates how much work has gone into partnering other funding that they can leverage as well.
Thank you. Is this working? I can't tell. Okay. So going to the first part of that question in regards to having a report back, I think that what will be part of the process when we talk about the policy to the policy committee is to make sure there is an understanding, and then maybe following that, when that policy comes to the board, we could pair that with an explanation of how that vetting process or ranking process would work. I've been part of a number of them, and I know with a resort municipality that I was with, it had an extensive review by a committee. It was very well done, and those recommendations come through. And just like when you do a tender, there's a checklist of items that you rank the projects against that's defined within the policy. You're ranking your projects against those, and we're able to show those upon request. But that committee would bring those recommendations forward, which could include things such as sustainability. The thing I get concerned about when we cut funding is for some of these small groups, as Ms. McMillan said, if you say, oh, I'm going to give them 2,500 instead of 5,000, some of these groups can't even offer the event. In this case, obviously, that isn't the scenario we're dealing with. So those questions are really important. We want to make sure that there's a good list of criteria that we can rank that could include things like sustainability.
Thank you. And I have Director Morris.
Thank you, Chair Horton. This might now be a bit of a redundant question, but the comment about analyzing the budgets, where you were speaking about $50,000, $100,000. Just the quick question is, when you look at those budgets, are they in fact cash investments or are there in-kind contributions? Because that also impacts how you analyze where we go forward with the policies around how we're going to support. So just that'll be a piece of information that would be useful, I think, for us all in terms of making decisions on that. So leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. And just a note to remind board members that even if you are not on the policy committee, you are still welcome to attend policy committee meetings when something of interest to you is being discussed. You can provide input and ask questions and make comments. The only thing you cannot do is vote. And show up early because these puppies move fast. If you show up at 10 past the hour, you might find an empty room. Right, so I'm just going to remind everyone what the motion is that's actually on the floor, which is that the Kamloops Exhibition Association receive the amount of $2,500 with the remaining $2,500 that was to be allocated to them to be allocated elsewhere. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? None. That is carried. Is Director Houghton still with us? Is he?
Yeah. Did he go for coffee?
He said he was going out for a jug of milk. So we are now left with items 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I would like to make a motion that the British Columbia Agricultural Exposition received $2,500, that the following amounts, that the other amounts remain the same, and that $2,500 each is allocated to the Kamloops Symphony Society and Western Canada Theatre. Director Bass, thank you very much. Any comments, questions, discussion? All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried, and we're going to take a break.
Now we're.
Now it works.
All right, I trust everyone is refreshed. And we will go on to item 10.1.5, Growing Communities Fund, TNRD allocation, 5,441,000, which was announced in March, I believe, of this year. I'll just note that staff are at this time looking for a general direction from the board regarding spending. This is not a time for specifics, such as I would like to see $500,000 allocated to X. Most of this will go to core capital planning and utilities as recommended by the Utilities Committee. And specific details will be coming to the board in September. So we do have a recommendation. Director Laird, seconded by Director Morris. Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? No, seeing none on the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. That is carried. Item 10.1.6, Tobiano Street Lighting and Parks Services Update. This is for information only. Mr. Vieira, spotlight is on you. But Tish, thank you, Director Blackwell.
Sorry, I didn't have a presentation for this. If there's any questions on the report,
Are there any questions for Mr. Vieira? Director Garnier?
Thank you, Chair. Director or Jamie, I understand that the Tobiano residents have gone to a tribunal. And that tribunal is making decisions based on the Tobiano Resort Association bylaws and what the current status is. It would be helpful if we could somehow get an update from the province on where they stand on that to help us understand where we stand.
yes, and I agree. We'll share that information when we receive it, and I'll check in with the province when there's a decision. Last I checked, that we hadn't heard back if there had been a ruling yet.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this? No, Director Sowell's looking a little sideways there. Oh, there we go. Making us dizzy. All right, move on to item 10.1.7, Tronquil Valley Community Hall. We do have a recommendation here. Someone like to move the recommendation? Director Laird, seconded by Director Grenier. Are there any questions or comments on this? No? On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Loon Lake Fire Hall capital funding. We do have a report and we have a recommendation. Director Rain moves the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Director Thorpe, thank you very much. Questions or comments? Mr. Vieira is here to answer any questions you might have. But it looks like the street light is off you, Mr. Vieira. On the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 10.19, Canada Community Building Fund, Spence's Bridge Community Water System Backup Power Source. We have a report and a recommendation. Director Thorpe makes a motion.
Second.
Vice Chair Smith, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments here? No. On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 10.1.10 has been resolved, so hurrah for that. We have 10.1.11, the building permit activity highlights for information. Does anyone have any comments here? No? Then we have the committees, Fraser Basin Council. We have the EA Directors Committee, Policy and Governance Committee for information. Anyone have any comments about any of those minutes? Director Thorpe?
Sorry, actually, I was asking Jamie yesterday and now Director Ranta isn't here. I was curious about this. Oh, hello, Director Ranta. I have a question for you. I'm looking at the Fraser Basin Council and under Regional Wildlife Advisory Committees, it says that FBC has retained by the BC Minister of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship to establish 3 regional wildlife advisory committees to support a new provincial initiative Together for Wildlife. It says click for more information, but it doesn't let me click. I'm wondering, how do we maybe recommend somebody for this committee?
I've got no idea. Does that answer your question?
Nope.
Oh,
Can you find out for me?
I can certainly try.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any other questions or comments? We move on to 12.1.1 Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC. Action is requested, and among those actions is that we forward this as in the form of a resolution to SILGA to come up at UBCM. That, of course, would not be until next year, and it's my understanding that the Regional District of Nanaimo has already sent this to UBCM as a resolution. We will all have an opportunity to vote yay or nay on it when it comes up in Vancouver in September. So I would make a motion to receive this for information. Second by Director Rain. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? On the question then, all those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. And we have for information, an item from the District of Coldstream. Anyone have any comments on this? We move on to new business. I understand this is where we are going to discuss the subject of what ministers do we want to have the pleasure of their company with at UBCM. But first of all, I'm going to ask Corporate Officer Campbell just to say a few words about new business.
Thank you, Chair Roden. So I wasn't at the last meeting in May, but I understand that an item came up under new business. And there may have been some concern about whether or not that should have come up under new business and whether it should have properly been a notice of motion. I understand that it was a request to send a letter to the province, BC Wildfire, regarding a fire ban in advance of the May long weekend. I think that it was the correct thing to do if the board supported and felt that that was urgent. Typically, of course, that would have political implications, and it did have political implications. But given the urgency of it and the fact that I understand the entire board supported the motion, I think that it was appropriate that it was raised under new business. But typically something like that, that's a substantial departure from operations, or that would have political implications or require staff time, that would properly be a notice of motion. And I've seen so far in this term that the board has actually done a really good job of bringing notices of motion where they should be notices of motion, and new business is really just meant to be updates from your respective areas, inquiries, and letters of support if they don't have significant implications. So I just wanted to just give that overview. If there's any questions, you can let me know.
Okay, thank you very much. And so you all received an email regarding meetings with ministers at UBCM. It should be ministers really, or ministries, because we do not have to meet with a ministry. Sometimes it can be more productive and helpful to meet with staff. But right now, what we are looking for is a wish list, if you will, of what ministers or ministries, various directors would like to try to obtain meetings with during UBCM, and a one-sentence elevator pitch as to why you think we should be meeting with this particular minister or ministry. And then what will happen is staff will compile a list, and we will then see the person who wants to meet with a particular minister can meet with staff to flesh out the request as to why. That will then be forwarded to Victoria, and at some point before September 12th-ish, we will find out who we're meeting with. I will just mention too, regarding healthcare, always a popular topic. The CAO of Cache Creek, Damien Couture, was in contact with our CAO in Ashcroft, Daniela Dick. The village of Cache Creek has requested a meeting, I understand, with the healthcare minister. And the suggestion from CAO Couture in Cache Creek was that Cache Creek, Clinton, Ashcroft and the TNRD, and Vice Chair Smith has asked for Logan Lake to have a meeting together, to share that meeting with the ministry to show the united communities and elected officials rather than us all asking for one meeting each. So unless someone has a specific healthcare topic on healthcare specific to the TNRD, we could always have one or two directors go in on that meeting and have a joint meeting to show strength in numbers. Just throwing that out there. So I'll ask for suggestions for minister meetings. All right. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Hang on. I can't write that fast and have it legible. So we've got Director Blackwell, we've got Director Laird, we've got Director Thorpe. Who else? Director Houghton. Who else? Director Grenier. So I've got Blackwell, Laird, Thorpe, Houghton, and Grenier. Anyone have their hand up who's not on that list? All right, Director Blackwell, you're first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think just to the same comment that you made about healthcare, the mayors of both Barrier, Clearwater, Valemount and McBride have asked, along with the chief of the Sim First Nation, have asked for a meeting with MOTI to talk about highway improvements and safety. But I think there's probably also definitely a TNRD wide initiative on enforcement and safety, RCMP, CVSC, and the response to the truckers industry and some of the issues there. That is sort of an umbrella that might cover many of us. So a Minister Farnworth meeting on enforcement and safety might be in order.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had the same issue with Modi. I think a lot of the area directors have already had discussions with Modi over our rural roads and the condition they're in. And I think that's something we have to make the minister aware of. I have a road in Lower Nicola that has been basically knocked apart because of the number of trucks that go up and down there from the mine, or I should say the gas line installation. Evidently, there was 3 main dumping points in all of BC to haul fill. They decided that the old Craig Mountain mine site was an ideal situation. It goes right through the middle of our community, and they basically the 24/7 they drive up and down that road, and they've destroyed the road. We did have a meeting with our local Modi. I guess he's the area manager. He said it would be fixed in 3 to 4 years when they pave the road to out to Spence's Bridge. So, you know, that to my speaking is 3 to 4 years out. There's no any sort of financial planning or anything done around that. So I think they need to think about it sooner than later. Thank you.
So Director Blackwell, you were proposing a meeting with Minister Farnworth in his capacity as Public Safety Minister. Director Laird, are you thinking we should also be having a meeting in addition to that with Minister Fleming from Ministry of Highways? Okay. Thank you. Next, I have Director Thorpe.
I've got 3. Do you want me to go through all of them?
Start, yeah. And
All right.
just the elevator pitch. You don't have to go into a detailed reason right now. That would
All
be
right.
to be fleshed out.
Number
later.
1, emergency evacuation routes. I think we know that that's high priority in the news right now. We've got them in our small communities. I'm thinking regional operations with Ministry of Forests. We don't necessarily need the minister. Minister of Agriculture, this one is minister, looking at hobby farm animals during an emergency situation, 2 separate rules. From commercial, would like to see something done to address the hobby farm large animals during an evacuation and emergency. And number 3 is disaster risk management, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, looking at more mitigation for fires and floods, putting the money into that as a proactive measure rather than reactive. Thank you.
All right, so we've got regular operations, Ministry of Highways, not necessarily the same meeting as with Minister Fleming. We've got a Minister of Forests, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Minister of Forest, because it's
Minister of
mostly
Forest.
forest service roads.
Ministry of Agriculture regarding hobby farm animals and the rules surrounding those, and we've got EMCR. Okay, thank you. All right, Director Hutton.
Got a bit of a wish list too, and I think this will tie in probably with Director Grenier. We need to meet with whatever minister would be involved on our small water systems that we talked about at utilities meeting.
That's Mr. Kang. Minister Kang.
Mr. Kang, okay. That was one wish list. The other one is on the invasive plants committee. I know Jamie sent a request out. Would that be with Minister Crown Lands that we're gonna want to meet with, or?
I think that might be Agriculture Minister Alexis, but
I think it's Crown Lands.
Yeah, that would be Minister of Forest and Minister of Transportation are typically the two that we request that meeting with. In the past, it's usually been one that we actually get a meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think we should ask Crown Lands to whoever's in charge of that, because that's the problem part is the private landowner will look after his land, but the Crown's people won't
Yes.
look after theirs.
So there's three ministries that have Crown land under their jurisdiction, that Ministry of Environment with Parks, Ministry of Forests with General Crown land, and then
Okay.
Ministry of Transportation with the road right of ways.
Yes.
Crown.
And I know, same as Director Blackwell on meeting with highways on safety on our rural highways, whether it be 5 North or the truck impact on 5A from Merritt to Kamloops too. So those are the ones I had in mind. Thank you.
And we can have a meeting that has more than one topic, like with one minister that discusses more than one topic. So we can, if more than one person is asking to meet with the Ministry of Transportation on 3 separate items, that would be one meeting that we would request. And the briefing note to the ministry would say, these are the 3 things that we want to talk about. Sure, I've got Director Grenier, Director O'Reilly, and then we'll circle back to Director Laird. Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. So following up with what Doug had said, I have submitted a request. I wasn't sure which minister, but I'm hearing Kang on this issue of water utilities. And I would point out that this will be the 3rd meeting of this type. And so this has to be a fairly forceful meeting in terms of our ask. And our ask is pretty big because we got a $20 million bunch of utilities that we have to somehow run. So I've asked for input by staff for that meeting and be delighted to have other people from the committee or the board attend that. Then there's the other one, which is a Modi issue. Again, Director Laird has got issues. You might recall that we wrote a letter to Minister Fleming in December. In January, he responded saying, we're going to get on this Thompson-Nicola Creek Road improvement. When I spoke to the Modi reps, they said sometime late July. I was up there the last weekend, and the road is in pretty bad shape. So I've asked for a meeting with Minister Fleming to follow up specifically with his letter on Thompson-Nicola Creek. And I've also asked for a request for the Minister of Opposition, which I don't know who the critic is. Is it Peter Millibar? Whoever the critic is, basically to follow up with this with the hope that we can have by September some activity on that road, which had been promised earlier. So those are the 3 requests. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder too that what we are bringing forward as the TNRD should be something that is a TNRD wide issue or something that affects the entire TNRD. Something like the Thompson-Nicola Creek Road, I think is better left to follow up from the TNRD outside of UBCM. Am I correct, CO Hildebrand?
What I would suggest is we would actually set that up as a staff meeting when it comes to individual EA specific things. This one's maybe a bit different because there was already a letter to Minister Fleming and potentially a follow-up. So that could be potentially added on. So I'm kind of taking notes here and separating it maybe between staff ministry meetings and ministers, and I can recap at the end and make sure I've got alignment.
Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for me missing the first part. And has Minister Katrine Conroy been added to this list? Okay, so I'd like to add Mr. Conroy to this list. And this is the vessel to get the Thompson-Nicola Regional Hospital District. A meeting with ministers at UBCM is through our regional board here today. And the topics that I'd like to address, and I think it's incredibly important, one being the close to $300,000 shortfall that everyone around this table and all EA electoral areas are paying more for every piece of small equipment, large equipment, capital investments we are paying more for. And this needs to be dealt with in a timely manner because it cannot continue the way it's continuing. And I think this board needs to make some decisions soon. And I think the Minister of Finance should be involved in conversations before we start making choices here. But as far as I'm concerned, this cannot continue for the Thompson-Nicola Regional Hospital District. The second issue that I would like to address, I had it initially put down as funding equity outside of the Lower Mainland, but frankly, it's the funding inequity outside of the Lower Mainland. And as many of us know around this table, the Lower Mainland does not pay a hospital tax on their taxes. Rather, they pay a transportation tax that's supposed to pay for transportation and transit. And with recent announcement of a $750 million investment from the provincial government to help the transit system in the Lower Mainland, that's fantastic. I think it's great. However, that being said, by default, we are paying more, and that's not appropriate. We need to have conversations about the 40% portion that we pay to large capital projects and what that ratio is. If there's going to be more funding announcements for the Lower Mainland, we need to ensure that we are still paying an equitable share and not have more downloaded to our taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Director O'Reilly. Director Rain beside me is very much in agreement with you. I will just relay his comments. Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After being to a lot of meetings with minister people over the years, they only allocate you a certain amount of time to have your discussion. So I'd just like to see if the administration, like we're talking about rural roads, could we not have a meeting strictly on regional district problems with rural roads and not proper maintenance, and like make sure that we have more than one topic? Because minister only, I think they allow you maybe 20 minutes at the most. So if you have too many topics, you don't get to cover them all. Thank you.
Director Getz.
Like a meeting with Minister Whiteside on the 2.5 decrim, the where we're going over the 3-year plan, the dissuasion centers, and any kind of plan to get us through the 3-year pilot program.
That's decriminalization of small amounts of hard drugs. Okay, thank you. Any other requests? Sound like I'm a DJ. Any requests from the listeners? Phone them in. All right, do we have a proposed list? CEO Hildebrand.
I think I do. So let me just kind of run it over and just please correct me if I'm wrong. So for invasive plants, there may be, staff will determine what the best course of action is with the ministries, because as Jamie mentioned, there's 3 there. So we'll look after that. And then it also included in that would be hobby farms. The next one I've got would be the other one from Director Thorpe was from EMCR, was the proactive emergency management. What happened there? Sorry, being proactive around disasters. I'm thinking that what might be, was that minister or staff? That's okay. That's how I've got it as staff. Great. And then I've got what Director O'Reilly just said. So hospital board would be with Conroy with 2 topics there that he just mentioned. There's the Minister Dix that'll have kind of that joint municipality, the one that Chair Roden brought up regarding health services in rural areas. Director Getz on mental health and addictions with Minister Whiteside with decriminalization. We've got municipal affairs, Minister Kang for small water systems. And then I've got highway safety and enforcement. Director Blackwell with Farnworth. And I've got transportation and infrastructure. So Modi would be highway safety and maintenance potentially. And that's some of the examples that we shared. there might be a good possibility to ask for a staff meeting with Modi as well as a minister meeting and then separate that. And perhaps we can kind of recap all this and send it out back to the board just to make sure we've got it right. Did I miss anything? Oh yeah, I did miss one. Evacuation routes with Ralston.
Ministry of Forests,
Yeah.
Regional Operations, Emergency Egress Routes.
Got that one. Minister Ralston, yeah. That's the minister though, that one, right? That's staff?
Staff, Regional Operations Staff.
Got it.
I was reading your 53-page manual.
Okay, I think I captured it. Did I miss anything else? Dr. Grenier?
How would you want to approach the regional road issue and the specific on the Tranquil Chris Creek Road? Because there's been some commitments made and it's about fulfillment of commitment. That's all I'm really trying to do is press the fulfillment of commitment.
To be honest, in my experience at UBCM, when it comes to individual roads like that, I remember sitting beside Director Schaefer and meeting with staff. We got a lot of traction. And we could hold them to account much quicker than sometimes with the minister meetings because they're being inundated with much bigger issues and projects. But we were very successful there. So that would be my suggestion. We could also bring up the letter with staff and that would certainly be messaged back to the minister as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Morris.
Thank you. Just a minor one, in all likelihood, but a conversation around Crown lands, public use, encroachment. It's a little bit of a separate topic, but it's becoming more and more with, at least in Area P and probably within the TNRD area in general.
Are you suggesting minister or staff?
Your thoughts on that, I guess. I mean, I would suspect that a senior staff member might work and throw it at a minister if somebody's sitting there, kind of thing. Yeah. There's just seems to be a lot more conflict occurring, so let's be ahead of it as opposed to behind it.
Yeah, I can add that. And just for the record, I want to make sure we will request all of these and the chances of getting them, we will not know until they confirm it. Sometimes we will get them all, sometimes we'll get half. So we'll do our best to, I think the booking opens on July 2nd. So we'll start online and get that set up as quickly as we can, but just be prepared. We may not get them all. And then we sometimes may default to staff then if we don't get the minister meeting. So we'll do our best to get what you asked for.
Thank you, everyone. Is there anything else under new business? Director Smith.
Just a point, I don't know if anyone was listening to the radio today, and amongst all of this angst about wildfires, the Caribou Fire District is rescinding their campfire ban as of noon tomorrow.
So is the Kamloops Fire Center. Kamloops Fire Center is
They must know
rescinding the
something
camp.
we don't know.
That was officially the earliest that they have ever banned campfires in the province, and it may now be in the running for the shortest period of time they have ever banned. I think that's remarkably short-sighted, but there we go. Anything else under new business? Director Otten.
Actually, as Director Newstater said, I should bring this up. I wasn't going to, but it's probably a good news story. In the short term of being a director, you get inundated by wants and needs of constituents, and some other things don't really fall within our mandate. But the folks out at Del Oro, of course, they've got one of our great water systems that needs work, but I told them that it's a work in progress. But then they approached me about the paving of Sonora Road and Durango Road, which is the two roads, the center road and the long road within the subdivision, just east of Kamloops from the city boundary. And so I contacted our dear friend Sam, our area highways manager, and my contact is general manager at Argo Road Maintenance, Justin Van Eiderson, put in a bit of a wish list of, we need some road maintenance done around here. So at first they said they got no funding, which is usually their way out. So I made a couple more emails, one to our MLA. I'm not sure what got it rolling, but I made another phone call. All of a sudden, Del Oro and Old Ferry Road, which is a road off a Hook Road, goes underneath the highway and follows the parallel of the Thompson River. A bunch of older houses along there. After the July long weekend, both of those roads are going to get a new coat of asphalt. So I guess some things work out, some don't, but they seem to come through with, I'd like to thank Ministry of Highways, Sam and Justin from Argo for, I think it was a joint effort between the two of them to get that done. And then also our annual report, I failed to mention the cover shot of that is an Area L. It's one of the nicest pictures I've seen. It's a cowboy crew at the Frolic Cattle Company made the cover photo, and I'd like to acknowledge them. They're one of the larger landholders and one of our larger neighbors to the south, and they are actually the largest landholder that the Trans Mountain Pipeline went through, and they're good caretakers of land. I'd like to congratulate them and Colton and whoever was responsible for this cover shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hodden. Any other new business? What's that? Sorry, who? Director Lepso.
So during the Village of Chase meets with our 3 Secwepemc communities, and so I took the beautiful map of all of the First Nations in the TNRD, and it was very well received. And the chief from Adams Lake response was, look at all the economic opportunities we have in the TNRD.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, Vice Chair Smith.
I just wanted to extend my thanks to this board for affording me the opportunity to attend the FCM conference in Toronto. It was the first time that I've been. It was an excellent conference. It was an excellent experience, and I just wanted to thank this board for the opportunity to go. Thank you.
Anything else under new business today? Do we have any notices of motion? I don't think we do. So we move on to question period. Are there any questions? No one online has any questions? In that case, this meeting lasted for 8 minutes plus 137 minutes. But we now sit adjourned. Thank you very much. We will see you all tomorrow morning at 9.